Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. My guest with us today is Mike Licona, who is an author and sought-after speaker. He has co-authored a book on the resurrection with Gary Habermas. It's good to be with you, Mike.
Well, you too. Thanks.
Hey, listen, if you could just help us to understand this idea of the resurrection. We know it's been under attack ever since it's happened.
Well, I think the first thing we would do is we would look at some facts that would be so strongly evidenced that they have convinced nearly every single scholar who studied this subject to regard them as historical facts, including skeptical ones. That would be things such as Jesus' death by crucifixion, that subsequent to his death, that Jesus' disciples had experiences that they interpreted as Jesus appearing to them risen from the dead, and that these occurred in individual and in group settings. And third, that there was a skeptic, a persecutor of the church named Paul, who converted to Christianity when he had an experience that he believed was of the risen Jesus appearing to him. Now this would be like a modern-day Osama bin Laden, who has an experience and then converts from Islam to Christianity to his own demise and preaching to the Muslim world and gets stoned for it. This is kind of like what we're looking at with Paul. So now, as historians, what we want to do is we want to come up with a hypothesis that will best explain these three facts. And we would do this, determine which is the best hypothesis by saying which one accounts for all three facts, rather than just one or two, which can account for them without bending them or forcing them to fit like a square peg in a round hole. And third, what can we do it without any, which hypothesis does it best without any non-evidenced assumptions? And the resurrection beats the others hands down. So, for example, the leading naturalistic explanation, hallucinations, it can account for Jesus' death by crucifixion. It can account for the appearances to individuals, but not the group appearances, because hallucinations are not group phenomena. And it can't account for the appearance to the skeptic Paul because he wasn't in a state of grief. So, I mean, you could kind of force those to fit, but then you'll lose explanatory power because you're forcing them to fit. With resurrection, all three fit very easily. If Jesus rose from the dead, it explains his death by crucifixion, why numerous people in individual and group settings believe they saw him risen from the dead, and why even a skeptic saw him risen from the dead. So, historically speaking, forget, assuming that the Bible is trustworthy in any manner. Just taking the facts upon which most everybody agrees on, you can come to the resurrection of Jesus as the best explanation, and thus we should regard it as an event that occurred in history.
Our guest is Dr. Gary Habermas, one of the world's foremost experts on the resurrection. Dr. Habermas, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Listen, I know that a lot of people are skeptical about the resurrection, and you've dedicated your life to defending that. If you had literally a brief amount of time to be able to defend it, what would you say defend the resurrection of Jesus Christ?
I guess I would start with my method, and the method I use is, I would challenge a skeptic, and I would say, I can take skeptical data that skeptical Bible scholars, now we're talking specialists, because the skeptic's response is going to be, I don't believe anything. But I mean, if you talk to someone who's as skeptical as they are, but they're well trained in biblical studies, I will take their data, which they concede, because they all concede about the exact same thing. My argument is, I can take the data they concede and show the resurrection happened from their basis. So it looks something like this. If the Bible's inspired, Jesus is raised from the dead. If the Bible's not inspired, but it's just reliable, Jesus is raised from the dead. And if it's neither inspired nor reliable, if the New Testament is not reliable, you can still get these facts and Jesus is raised from the dead. So the bottom line is, Jesus is raised from the dead no matter what your view of Scripture is, which I call a heads I win, tails you lose argument. Now, if I only could pick one argument for the resurrection, I'd say it's this one. Virtually every critical scholar writing, I mean, we're saying 98, 99%, would concede something like this. The earliest followers of Jesus had experiences which they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. They'll concede that. And here's my point. If they had real experiences, and if you cannot disprove it with the naturalistic theory, which I will gamble they won't be able to do. But if you have real experiences and you can't explain them away, then what you have is, the best explanation for that is that Jesus really appeared to them. And that would be the one evidence. If I could only use one, I would take with it. So I would use their method, their data, to show this one argument. And if they can't get away with it with the naturalistic evidence that are of hypothesis, then what you have is the actual resurrection appearances.
Thank you very much. For more information on the resurrection, make sure you pick up his book, A Case for the Resurrection.